The blizzard had been raging for 3 days across the Wyoming Territory, turning the landscape into a white wasteland where even the most experienced frontiersmen knew better than to venture out. But desperation doesn't wait for fair weather, and neither does a mother's love. Through the howling wind and driving snow, a figure stumbled forward, clutching 2 small forms against her chest, leaving a crimson trail that the storm quickly erased. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Rebecca Hartford's legs gave out just as the old Stone Creek bridge came into view. The wooden planks, slick with ice and barely visible through the white curtain of snow, might as well have been a mile away. She collapsed to her knees, her breath coming in ragged gasps that formed instant clouds in the bitter air. The twins, Emma and Sophie, pressed closer to their mother's warmth, their tiny faces blue with cold, despite the threadbare blankets wrapped around them. Blood seeped through the torn fabric of her dress where Tommy Garrett's knife had found its mark during her escape. The wound wasn't deep enough to kill her quickly, but in this weather, with no shelter and 2 children depending on her, it might as well have been a death sentence. She'd made it 5 miles from the abandoned cabin where Tommy had finally shown his true nature. 5 miles through knee-deep snow with nothing but determination and maternal instinct driving her forward. The storm seemed to mock her efforts, each gust of wind threatening to knock her down permanently. Emma whimpered against her shoulder, and Sophie's small hand clutched weakly at her mother's coat. They were fading, all 3 of them, becoming just another tragic story that would be found when the spring thaw revealed winter's casualties. That's when she heard them, hoofbeats, steady, purposeful, cutting through the storm's chaos like a prayer being answered. Rebecca lifted her head, squinting through the snow, hardly daring to believe her ears. No one rode in weather like this, no sane person anyway. But Daniel Mitchell had never claimed to be entirely sane, especially when it came to winter storms and the secrets they sometimes held. The Mitchell Ranch sprawled across 15,000 acres of prime Wyoming Territory grazing land, a testament to what determination and a bit of luck could accomplish in the American frontier. Daniel Mitchell stood at the window of his study, watching the storm unleash its fury across his domain, but his thoughts weren't on cattle or property lines. At 32, he owned more land than most men could walk across in a full day, employed over 40 ranch hands, and had bank accounts in Denver and San Francisco that would make city businessmen envious. Yet the massive house felt hollow around him, each room echoing with the emptiness that success without companionship inevitably brings. The wind rattled the windows, and Danny found himself thinking about winter storms from his childhood, when he'd been just another orphaned ranch hand sleeping in the bunkhouse and dreaming of something more. Those dreams had come true in ways he'd never imagined, but they'd also taught him that getting everything you thought you wanted didn't guarantee happiness. He'd inherited the ranch 5 years ago from Old Man Hutchinson, a gruff cattle baron, who'd taken Danny in when he was 16 and had no family left in the world. Hutchinson had seen something in the quiet, determined boy that others missed, and when pneumonia took the old man's life, his will revealed a truth that shocked the entire territory. Danny hadn't just been a ranch hand. He'd been the closest thing to a son that Hutchinson had ever known. The inheritance had made Danny one of the wealthiest men in Wyoming Territory overnight, but wealth couldn't fill the silence that surrounded him in the evenings. He'd had his share of attention from the eligible daughters of Cedar Falls' prominent families, but none of them had stirred anything deeper than polite conversation. They saw his success, his land, his potential as a husband who could provide comfort and status. What they didn't see was the boy who'd once carved initials into the old cottonwood tree behind the schoolhouse, dreaming of a girl with copper hair and green eyes who'd made him believe he could be more than his circumstances. Ruth Palmer, his housekeeper and the closest thing to family he had left, often chided him about his solitary ways. She'd been with the ranch for 20 years, had watched Danny grow from a scrawny teenager into the man who now commanded respect throughout the territory. Ruth understood that all his success meant nothing if he had no one to share it with, but she also knew better than to push too hard. Danny would find his path when the time was right, or the path would find him. The storm had been building for days, and Danny had spent the morning making sure his cattle were sheltered and his men were safe. The bunkhouse was warm and well stocked, and the horses were secure in the barn. Everything was battened down for what promised to be one of the worst blizzards in recent memory. But something restless stirred in Danny's chest as he watched the snow fall, a feeling he couldn't quite name but couldn't ignore. Ruth brought him coffee as the afternoon light began to fade, though the storm made it difficult to tell day from night. She was a woman in her 50s with steel-gray hair and eyes that missed nothing, the kind of person who could read the weather and human nature with equal accuracy. "Storm's getting worse," she observed, setting the cup on his desk. "Haven't seen snow like this since the winter of '85. Danny nodded, still staring out at the white expanse. "The men are all accounted for. Every last one. Though Jake Morrison's been pacing the bunkhouse like a caged wolf. Says he's got a feeling something's not right out there." Jake Morrison was Danny's foreman, a man whose instincts about weather, cattle, and trouble had saved the ranch more than once. If Jake had a feeling, it was worth paying attention to. What kind of feeling? Ruth shrugged, but her expression was serious. The kind that makes a man want to saddle his horse despite having better sense. Says he heard something on the wind earlier, though he can't rightly say what. Danny turned from the window, his decision already made. "Tell Jake to saddle Thunder. And get my heavy coat. Danny Mitchell, you're not seriously thinking of riding out in this weather?" "Something's pulling at me, Ruth. Can't explain it, but I've learned to trust these feelings." Ruth studied his face, recognizing the expression that meant arguing would be pointless. She'd seen it when he'd decided to expand the ranch into the high country, when he'd stood up to the railroad company trying to force right-of-way through his best pasture, and when he'd taken in the Henderson children after their parents died in a typhoid outbreak. "Then you'd better take more than just your coat," she said with a sigh. "I'll pack medical supplies and blankets. If you're fool enough to ride into this storm, at least be prepared for whatever you might find." 20 minutes later, Danny was leading Thunder, his most reliable horse, from the barn into the teeth of the blizzard. The big gelding was bred for mountain weather and had the steady temperament needed for dangerous conditions. Jake Morrison had wanted to accompany him, but Danny had refused. Whatever was out there, he felt compelled to face it alone. The wind hit them like a physical force as they emerged from the shelter of the ranch buildings. Snow drove horizontally across the landscape, turning the familiar terrain into an alien world where landmarks disappeared and directions became meaningless. But Danny had been riding these trails for over 15 years, and Thunder knew the way even when visibility dropped to mere feet. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. They headed towards Stone Creek Bridge, following an instinct that seemed to pull Danny forward through the storm. The creek marked the eastern boundary of his property, and the bridge was a natural waypoint for anyone traveling the main road to Cedar Falls. If someone was in trouble out here, that's where they'd likely be found. The journey that normally took 20 minutes stretched into an hour of fighting through drifts and navigating by memory and intuition. Thunder's hooves found purchase on ice-covered ground, while Danny used his body to shield them both from the worst of the wind. The cold was bitter enough to freeze exposed skin in minutes, and even through his heavy clothing, Danny could feel winter's teeth trying to find their way to his bones. But as they approached the creek, he heard something that made his blood run cold. A sound that shouldn't exist in this white wilderness, yet unmistakably reached his ears through the storm's roar. A child's cry, thin and desperate, barely audible above the wind. Danny urged Thunder forward, his heart pounding as the bridge came into view through the driving snow. At first, he saw nothing but white drifts and ice-covered planks. Then movement caught his eye, a dark shape against the snow that resolved into a figure collapsed near the bridge's approach. As Thunder picked his way carefully down the slope, Danny's breath caught in his throat. A woman knelt in the snow. Two small children pressed against her, and even through the storm he could see the dark stain spreading across the white ground beneath her. Blood, bright red against the pristine snow, telling a story of violence and desperation that made his chest tighten with anger and fear. The woman looked up as Thunder's hooves crunched through the snow nearby, and Danny's world shifted on its axis, even through the pain and exhaustion etched into her features. Even with her copper hair darkened by snow and her green eyes clouded with suffering, he recognized her instantly. Rebecca Hartford, the banker's daughter who'd stolen his heart when they were both 17, who'd promised to wait for him when he left to make his fortune, who'd instead run off with Tommy Garrett 3 months later, leaving only a letter that had shattered every dream Danny thought he'd been building. She stared at him with the same shock he felt, her lips forming his name though no sound emerged. The years fell away in that moment, and he was 17 again, watching the girl he loved disappear from his life. But the children pressed against her brought him crashing back to the present, to the blood in the snow and the storm that threatened all their lives. Danny swung down from Thunder's back, his boots sinking deep into the drift as he approached. Rebecca tried to speak, tried to explain, but he held up a hand to stop her words. Explanations later, he said, his voice barely audible above the wind. Right now we need to get you somewhere warm. The twins looked up at him with eyes that held too much knowledge for their young faces. Emma and Sophie, he realized, though he'd never seen them before. They were beautiful children despite their current condition, with their mother's delicate features and hair that would probably shine copper in the sunlight. Rebecca tried to stand, but her legs wouldn't support her weight. The blood loss and cold had sapped her strength, and Danny could see that without immediate help, the storm would claim all 3 of them before morning. Can you hold on if I lift you onto the horse? He asked, already moving to support her weight. She nodded weakly, though he could see the effort it cost her to remain conscious. The twins clung to her with the desperate strength of children, who understood that their mother was all that stood between them and a world that had already proven itself cruel. Getting all 3 of them onto Thunder's back was a challenge that tested every skill Danny had learned in years of ranch work. The horse stood steady as stone while Danny lifted first one twin, then the other, settling them in front of the saddle. Then came the delicate task of helping Rebecca mount behind them, supporting her weight while ensuring she wouldn't fall during the ride back. The return journey to the ranch felt endless. Thunder moved carefully through the deep snow, his sure-footed progress the only thing standing between them and disaster. Danny walked alongside, one hand on the reins and the other steadying Rebecca when the wind threatened to knock them all sideways. She drifted in and out of consciousness during the ride, her grip on the twins the only thing keeping her upright. The lights of the ranch house had never looked more welcoming than they did that night, glowing through the storm like beacons of hope and safety. Ruth must have been watching for them, because the door flew open before they reached the porch, spilling warm yellow light across the snow. "Sweet Lord in heaven," Ruth breathed, taking in the sight of the woman and children Danny supported. "Get them inside before this cold finishes what that wound started." The next hour passed in a blur of activity. Ruth took charge with the efficiency of someone who'd dealt with frontier emergencies before, directing Danny to carry Rebecca to the guest room while she tended to the twins. Dr. Elizabeth Morgan, Cedar Falls' only physician, arrived within the hour despite the storm. Having been summoned by one of Danny's ranch hands who'd ridden into town through conditions that would have stopped a lesser horseman, Dr. Morgan was a woman in her 40s who'd come west after losing her husband in the war between the states. She'd proven herself capable of handling everything from difficult births to gunshot wounds, and her presence in Cedar Falls had saved more lives than anyone could count. She worked quietly and efficiently, cleaning and stitching Rebecca's wound, while Ruth warmed the twins by the fire and fed them hot soup. "She's lost a good bit of blood," Dr. Morgan told Danny as she finished her work. "The wound itself isn't fatal, but combined with exposure and exhaustion, she's in a precarious state. The children are cold and frightened, but they'll recover. With warmth and care." Danny nodded, his eyes fixed on Rebecca's pale face as she slept fitfully in the guest room bed. The twins had been settled in the adjoining room, finally warm and fed, sleeping the deep sleep of children who'd been pushed beyond their limits. "Do you know what happened to them?" Dr. Morgan asked, packing her medical supplies with practiced efficiency. "Not yet," Danny replied. "But I intend to find out." Dr. Morgan studied his face in the lamplight, noting the tension in his jaw and the protective way he watched over the sleeping woman and children. She'd known Danny Mitchell for several years and had never seen him show such intense concern for anyone outside his ranch family. "There's history between you and this woman," she observed. "Some," Danny admitted, "from a long time ago. Well, whatever that history is, she's going to need time to heal. The wound will mend, but she's been through an ordeal that goes beyond physical injury. Those children have seen things that no child should see." After Dr. Morgan left, Danny found himself sitting in the chair beside Rebecca's bed, watching the rise and fall of her breathing. Ruth had checked on the twins one final time before retiring to her own room, leaving Danny alone with his thoughts and the woman who'd once held his heart. Rebecca stirred as the storm began to quiet outside, her eyes opening to focus slowly on his face. For a moment, confusion clouded her features, as if she couldn't quite believe where she was or who was watching over her. "Danny?" Her voice was barely a whisper, rough from cold and exhaustion. "You're safe," he said simply. "You and the girls. You're at Mitchell Ranch, and you're safe." Tears gathered in her eyes, not from physical pain but from the overwhelming relief of being truly safe for the first time in years. She dreamed of this place during the worst moments of her marriage to Tommy Garrett, remembered the boy who'd once promised her a life filled with honest work and genuine affection. "I never thought I'd see you again," she whispered. "I never stopped hoping I would," Danny replied, the truth of it surprising them both. The storm outside was finally beginning to weaken, but inside the warm ranch house, a different kind of storm was just beginning. The past had collided with the present in the most dramatic way possible, and 3 lives hung in the balance while 2 hearts that had been separated by time and circumstances found themselves face to face once again. Rebecca closed her eyes, allowing herself to feel truly safe for the first time in 5 years. Tomorrow would bring questions and explanations, decisions and consequences. But tonight, she was warm and protected. Her children were sleeping peacefully in real beds, and the boy she'd once loved had become a man strong enough to save them all from the storm. The morning light filtered weakly through the frost-covered windows of the Mitchell Ranch, casting long shadows across the hardwood floors. The storm had finally exhausted itself during the night, leaving behind a world transformed by snow and ice. Rebecca woke slowly, her body protesting every movement, as the events of the previous day came flooding back. The warmth of real blankets, the scent of coffee drifting up from the kitchen, the absence of fear for the first time in months, all felt like fragments of a dream she was afraid to trust. She turned her head carefully, wincing at the pull of stitches, and found the chair beside her bed empty. Danny had been there when she'd fallen asleep, his presence a comfort she'd forgotten she could feel. Now in the pale morning light, doubt began to creep in. What must he think of her? The girl who'd once promised to wait for him, who'd instead chosen excitement over stability, passion over patience. She'd traded the quiet strength he'd offered for Tommy Garrett's dangerous charm, and the cost of that choice was written in the scars across her heart and the wound in her side. Voices drifted up from downstairs, and Rebecca recognized the higher pitch of her daughter's laughter mixing with deeper adult tones. Emma and Sophie were awake, and they were laughing. The sound was so foreign after months of hushed whispers and fearful silence that it brought fresh tears to her eyes. When had she last heard them laugh with such abandon? Before Tommy's drinking had turned violent. Before the nights spent hiding in root cellars and abandoned buildings. Before the money had run out and desperation had driven them from town to town, always one step ahead of Tommy's creditors and his temper. A soft knock at the door interrupted her thoughts, and Ruth Palmer entered carrying a breakfast tray. The older woman's face was kind but assessing, taking in Rebecca's improved color and the alertness in her eyes. "You look better this morning," Ruth said, setting the tray on the bedside table. "Dr. Morgan said you'd need to stay in bed for a few days, but I can see some strength coming back to you already." Rebecca struggled to sit up, accepting Ruth's help in arranging the pillows behind her back. The aroma of fresh biscuits and honey made her stomach clench with hunger, reminding her that she'd eaten little but scraps for weeks. "My daughters," Rebecca began, her voice still hoarse. "Are they safe and sound?" Ruth assured her. "Emma's been helping me collect eggs from the hen house, and Sophie's discovered the barn cats. They're good children, though they startle easy. Been through something terrible, I'd guess." Rebecca nodded, not trusting herself to speak. The kindness in Ruth's voice, the casual way she mentioned her daughters by name, the normalcy of children. Doing chores and playing with cats all felt precious and fragile. "Danny's been up since before dawn," Ruth continued, pouring coffee from a ceramic pot. "Had 3 of his best men ride the property lines, making sure no one followed your trail in the storm. He's taking no chances with your safety." The implications of that statement settled heavily in Rebecca's chest. Danny knew she was running from something, someone. He hadn't asked questions yet, but he was already protecting her and the twins from whatever dangers might follow in their wake. "I need to tell him," Rebecca said quietly. "About Tommy, about what happened. He deserves to know what he's risked by helping us." Ruth studied her face for a long moment before responding. "That's between you and Danny, but I'll say this from a woman who's seen her share of trouble on the frontier. There's running from something, and there's running toward something. Seems to me you've been doing the first for a while. Maybe it's time to consider the second." After Ruth left, Rebecca forced herself to eat despite the knot in her stomach. The food was simple but nourishing, and she could feel her body beginning to respond to proper nutrition and rest. Through the window, she could see Danny in the yard below, talking with several ranch hands while they saddled horses. Even from a distance, she could see the authority in his posture, the way the other men listened when he spoke. The quiet boy she'd known had become a leader of men, someone others looked to for guidance and protection. The boy she'd left behind had written her letters during those first months after she'd gone with Tommy, letters full of hurt and confusion, asking what he'd done wrong, begging her to explain why she'd chosen a stranger over someone who'd loved her since childhood. She'd read every letter in secret, hidden them from Tommy's jealous eyes, but she'd never answered. How could she explain that she'd confused love with comfort, mistaken security for a cage? How could she tell him that she'd wanted to feel dangerous and desired, not cherished and protected? By the time she'd realized her mistake, Tommy had moved them far from Wyoming Territory. He'd gambled away her father's money, the money that was supposed to be their stake for a new life in California. When the twins came, Tommy had seemed pleased at first, proud of his ability to create life. But as they'd grown from babies into toddlers with needs and voices and wills of their own, his patience had worn thin. Children required sacrifice, consistency, and sobriety, none of which Tommy possessed. Rebecca closed her eyes, remembering the night she'd finally understood that staying meant watching her daughters grow up afraid. Tommy had come home drunk and angry, raging about money and debts and the way his luck had turned sour. When Emma had started crying at the noise, he'd raised his hand to her, and something in Rebecca had snapped like a dry branch under pressure. The fight that followed had ended with Tommy's knife finding her ribs and Rebecca's desperate flight into the storm with her daughters. She'd known he would follow when he sobered up, known that his pride wouldn't let her escape so easily. But she'd also known that staying meant death, either quick from his violence or slow from his neglect. Now, looking out at the peaceful ranch yard where her daughters played in the snow under Ruth's watchful eye, Rebecca understood that she'd finally stopped running from something and started running toward it. She'd run toward the memory of safety, toward the dream of a life where children could laugh without fear, toward the hope that the boy who'd once promised to love her forever might still have room in his heart for the woman she'd become. Sound of boots on the stairs announced Danny's approach, and Rebecca felt her pulse quicken with nervous anticipation. The door opened after a brief knock, and he entered carrying his hat in his hands, snow still clinging to his dark hair. His eyes met hers immediately, searching her face for signs of pain or distress. "You look stronger," he observed, settling into the chair beside her bed. "Ruth says you managed some breakfast." "More than I've eaten in weeks," Rebecca admitted. "Your kindness is going to spoil me for hardship." Danny's expression grew serious. "Rebecca, I need to know what we're facing. The men I sent out found tracks leading toward the ranch, but they were covered by fresh snow before they could follow them far. Someone was out there during the storm, and anyone fool enough to travel in that weather was either desperate or dangerous." Rebecca's hands twisted in the bed covers, and she forced herself to meet his eyes. "His name is Tommy Garrett. My husband, though I doubt the marriage was ever legal. He has a way with false names and forged documents." "The twins?" "Father, yes." The word came out like a confession, though he's never been much of a father to them. "Tommy's a gambler, a confidence man. Charming when he wants to be, violent when he's crossed. I took money from him when I left, money he'd stolen from others, but it was all I could do to feed the girls." Danny listened without judgment, his face carefully neutral as she spoke. Rebecca found herself telling him everything, the words pouring out like water through a broken dam. She told him about the false promises and the mounting debts, about the nights spent in flea-bag hotels and the days walking dusty roads. She described Tommy's drinking, his rages, his casual cruelty toward two little girls whose only crime was needing their mother's attention. "He'll come looking for us," she finished, her voice barely above a whisper. "Tommy doesn't forgive, and he doesn't forget. I've humiliated him by leaving, taken his property as he sees it. He'll want to make an example of what happens to those who cross him." Danny was quiet for a long moment after she finished speaking, his jaw tight with controlled anger. When he finally spoke, his voice was steady but carried an edge that reminded Rebecca he was no longer the gentle boy she'd once known. "How long do you think before he tracks us here? I tried to cover our trail, but with the girls slowing me down." Rebecca shook her head. "He knows this territory. He'll remember that you and I were once close. If he's sober and thinking clearly, he could be here within days. Then we'd better be ready for him." The certainty in Danny's voice surprised her. She'd expected him to ask her to leave, to protect his ranch and his people from the danger she'd brought to his doorstep. Instead, he was planning to face that danger head on. "Danny, you don't understand. Tommy's killed men before, over debts and card games. He's not someone you can reason with or scare off with a show of force. Neither am I when it comes to protecting what's mine." The possessive tone in his voice sent a shiver through Rebecca that had nothing to do with cold or fear. She stared at him, seeing the man he'd become layered over her memories of the boy he'd been. There was steel in him now, forged by years of frontier life, and the responsibilities of leadership. "I'm not yours, Danny," she said softly. "I gave up any claim to that when I left." "Maybe," he replied, standing to pace to the window. "But those little girls didn't choose any of this, and I'll be damned if I let some drunken gambler terrorize children under my roof." Rebecca watched him stare out at the snow-covered ranch, his hands clasped behind his back in a gesture she remembered from their youth. Even as a teenager, Danny had carried himself with a quiet dignity that set him apart from other boys his age. He'd never been the loudest or the most dramatic, but there had always been something solid about him, something that made others trust him instinctively. "Why are you doing this?" she asked. "After what I did to you, after the way I left, why? Would you risk everything to help us?" Danny turned from the window, and for a moment she saw past the successful rancher to the hurt boy he'd been 15 years ago. "Because I loved you then, and that love didn't die just because you did what you thought you had to do. Because those children deserve better than the hand they've been dealt. And because sometimes a man gets a chance to make things right that should have been right all along." The simple honesty of his words broke something loose in Rebecca's chest, and she felt tears she'd been holding back for years finally begin to fall. Not tears of fear or desperation, but tears of relief and gratitude and something that might have been hope. Danny moved back to the chair, reaching out to touch her hand with surprising gentleness. "Rest now. Build your strength back up. Whatever's coming, we'll face it together." Over the following days, Rebecca began to understand the life Danny had built for himself in her absence. The ranch was more than just a cattle operation. It was a small community unto itself, with families living in neat cabins scattered across the property, children attending a school Danny had built, and workers who clearly saw him as more than just an employer. Ruth became Rebecca's guide to this new world, explaining the rhythms and relationships that made the ranch function. There was Jake Morrison, the foreman whose instincts had helped guide Danny to Rebecca that night in the storm. Jake was a man in his 40s with graying hair and scars that spoke of a hard life made good, someone who'd found purpose in honest work after years of drifting. There was Dr. Morgan, who stopped by daily to check Rebecca's wound and chat with Ruth about everything from weather patterns to territorial politics. The doctor had taken a particular interest in Emma and Sophie, gently drawing them out of their fearful silence with stories and small gifts. There were the Hendersons, a family of 4 whose cabin sat near the main house, the parents working as a blacksmith and seamstress while their 2 boys attended school with a handful of other ranch children. Mrs. Henderson had appeared at Rebecca's door the second day with a basket of mended clothes that fit the twins perfectly, claiming she'd had them lying around but clearly having worked through the night to alter adult garments into children's clothing. Most remarkably, there was the easy way everyone accepted Rebecca and her daughter's presence without question or judgment. In a world where a woman's reputation was often her most valuable possession, where unmarried mothers faced social exile, the ranch community simply made room for 2 more children and asked no uncomfortable questions about their origins. "Danny built something special here," Ruth explained as they watched Emma and Sophie play in the snow with the Henderson boys. "Not just a business, but a place where people can start over if they need to. Half the families here came from somewhere else, running from something or looking for something better. Danny knows what it's like to need a second chance." Rebecca understood that Ruth was talking about more than just the ranch's hiring practices. Danny had created a haven for people who'd been broken by life, a place where past mistakes didn't define future possibilities. The question that gnawed at her was whether that philosophy extended to women who'd broken his heart and disappeared from his life. The answer came on her 4th day at the ranch, when she was finally strong enough to venture downstairs. Danny found her in the kitchen, helping Ruth prepare lunch while the twins sat at the table coloring with pencils Mrs. Henderson had provided. "You should still be resting," he said, but there was approval in his voice as he watched her work. I've been resting for days. I needed to feel useful again. Rebecca glanced at him as she kneaded bread dough, noting the way his eyes lingered on her face. Besides, I can't stay in bed forever. I need to start thinking about what comes next. Danny poured himself coffee from the pot on the stove, leaning against the counter to study her. What did you have in mind? I need to find work, somewhere to live with the girls. I can't impose on your hospitality indefinitely. You're not imposing. Danny, I mean it. His voice carried a firmness that stopped her protests. This ranch has room for as many people as want to make an honest living. Ruth's been after me to hire help in the house, and the school could use an assistant teacher. Emma and Sophie are already settling in with the other children. Rebecca stared at him, flour dusting her hands as she tried to process what he was offering. Not just temporary shelter, but a permanent place in the life he'd built. A chance to put down roots for the first time since she'd left her father's house. You're offering me a job? I'm offering you a home, Danny said quietly. If you want it. The simple words hung in the warm kitchen air, heavy with possibility and promise. Ruth had gone still beside the stove, pretending not to listen while obviously hanging on every word. The twins continued coloring, unconsciously secure in the safety they'd found. What about Tommy? Rebecca asked. What about the danger I've brought to your door? Danny's expression hardened slightly. Let me worry about Tommy Garrett. You worry about whether you can see yourself staying here, being part of what we've built. Rebecca looked around the kitchen, taking in the warm wood and gleaming surfaces. The children's artwork hung on the wall, the herbs drying from the rafters. It was exactly the kind of home she'd dreamed of as a girl, the kind of life she'd thought Tommy would give her. But where Tommy had promised excitement and adventure, Danny was offering something far more valuable, peace and permanence, and the chance to watch her daughters grow up safe. I don't know if I remember how to stay in one place, she said honestly. Neither did half the people here when they first arrived, Ruth interjected. Staying isn't something you remember, dear. It's something you choose every morning when you wake up. Danny nodded toward the window, where the ranch spread out under afternoon sunlight that turned the snow into diamonds. This place has taught me that sometimes the best things in life are the ones you have to wait for. I waited 15 years to see you again, Rebecca. I can wait a little longer for you to decide if this is where you belong. The patience in his voice, the complete absence of pressure or expectation, moved her more than any passionate declaration could have. This was the same quality that had drawn her to him as a girl, before she'd confused stability with stagnation. Danny offered love without conditions, acceptance without judgment, and the kind of quiet strength that could weather any storm. I'd like to try, she said finally, if you're sure. I've never been more sure of anything in my life. That evening, after the twins were asleep and Ruth had retired to her room, Rebecca and Danny sat on the front porch wrapped in heavy coats and warm blankets. The stars were brilliant overhead, unmarked by the smoke and noise of cities, and the night was so quiet they could hear snow falling from pine boughs in the distant forest. Do you ever regret staying here? Rebecca asked. You could have gone anywhere, done anything with your success. Why choose to stay in Wyoming Territory? Danny was quiet for so long she thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was thoughtful and distant. After you left, I thought about following you. Jake Morrison talked me out of it, said a man who chases after a woman who doesn't want him is just asking for heartbreak. So I stayed, threw myself into ranch work, tried to forget. But somewhere along the way, I realized this place had gotten into my blood. Not just the land, but the life we were building here. He gestured toward the scattered lights of the ranch buildings, each one representing a family that had found hope and purpose under his leadership. Every person who finds a home here, every child who grows up safe and educated, every family that gets a chance to start over clean, it all means something. I stayed because I found out that changing lives can fill the empty spaces in your own life. Rebecca studied his profile in the starlight, seeing the contentment that had settled into the lines around his eyes. And now I'm wondering if maybe I was meant to wait. If all those years of building this place were just preparing for the day when you'd need somewhere safe to land. The words sent warmth through her chest that had nothing to do with the blankets around her shoulders. You really think it could work? After everything that's happened, everything I've done? Danny turned to meet her eyes, and she saw no doubt in his expression. I think we're both different people than we were 15 years ago. Better people, maybe. People who understand the value of what we have here. A comfortable silence settled between them, broken only by the soft sounds of the ranch settling into sleep. Rebecca felt something she hadn't experienced in years, a sense of being exactly where she belonged. Not because someone had trapped her there or because she had no other options, but because she had chosen it freely and it had chosen her in return. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, and she knew Tommy's shadow still loomed somewhere in their future. But tonight, sitting beside the man who'd loved her before she knew her own worth, Rebecca allowed herself to believe that some stories really could have happy endings. The weeks that followed brought a rhythm to life at Mitchell Ranch that Rebecca had never experienced before. Each morning began with the soft sounds of the house awakening around her. Ruth's footsteps in the kitchen below, the distant lowing of cattle, and the cheerful voices of children preparing for their day. Emma and Sophie had adapted to ranch life with the resilience that children possess, their pale city complexions gradually giving way to healthy color from hours spent outdoors under Ruth's watchful supervision. Rebecca found herself settling into routines that felt both foreign and wonderfully familiar. She helped Ruth with the cooking and cleaning, her domestic skills rusty from years of uncertainty, but gradually returning as she worked alongside the older woman. There was something deeply satisfying about kneading bread that would feed the ranch hands, about mending clothes that belonged to people she was coming to care about planning meals that would bring everyone together on the large kitchen table. The schoolhouse sat at the far end of the main compound, a sturdy log building with real glass windows and a stone chimney that kept it warm even on the coldest days. Mrs. Clara Hoffman, the teacher Danny had hired from back east, was a spinster in her 30s who'd come west seeking adventure and found purpose in educating frontier children. She welcomed Rebecca's assistance with genuine enthusiasm, delighted to have someone who could help with the younger children while she worked with the older students on their more advanced lessons. Emma and Sophie blossomed in the classroom environment, their natural intelligence emerging as they gained confidence in their safety. Emma showed particular aptitude for reading, often found curled up with a book during recess while other children played outside. Sophie gravitated toward arithmetic and drawing, her slate covered with careful calculations and sketches of the horses and cattle she observed around the ranch. Rebecca watched her daughter's transformation with a mixture of joy and heartbreak. This was how children should grow up, she realized, secure in the knowledge that tomorrow would bring the same safety as today, free to explore and learn without the constant vigilance that had marked their early years. The fearful silence that had characterized them during their time with Tommy gradually gave way to normal childish chatter and occasional disagreements that were resolved with words rather than cowering withdrawal. The other ranch families embraced Rebecca and her daughters with a warmth that still surprised her. Mrs. Henderson continued to appear with gifts of clothing and food, always with plausible explanations that didn't make Rebecca feel like charity case. The blacksmith, Bill Henderson, took special interest in the twins' education about ranch life, patiently explaining how horseshoes were made and why cattle needed to be branded, treating their questions with the same seriousness he gave to adult concerns. Jake Morrison became an unexpected ally and friend, his gruff exterior hiding a protective nature that extended to all the ranch families. He'd taken to checking on Rebecca and the twins during his daily rounds, ostensibly to ensure. Their quarters were adequate, but actually to provide the reassurance of his steady presence. Rebecca sensed that Jake understood something about running from a dangerous past. Though he never spoke directly about whatever had brought him to Danny's employment, Dr. Morgan continued her regular visits, pronouncing Rebecca's wound fully healed but lingering to share tea and conversation that Rebecca treasured. The doctor represented something Rebecca had never had before, a female friend who was neither competitor nor judge. Elizabeth Morgan had chosen an unconventional path for a woman of her time, and she seemed to recognize a kindred spirit in Rebecca's determination to build a better life for her children. Danny maintained a careful distance during these settling-in weeks, giving Rebecca space to find her place in the ranch community without pressure or expectation. But she was aware of his presence constantly, the way he ensured she had everything she needed without making her feel dependent, the way his eyes sought her out across crowded rooms during communal meals, the way he listened when she spoke with the kind of attention that made her words feel important. Their conversations during these weeks were carefully neutral, focused on practical matters and safe topics. Danny would ask about her work with the children, share ranch news that might interest her, discuss plans for spring planting and cattle drives. But underneath the mundane exchanges, Rebecca felt currents of deeper feeling, unfinished conversations that waited for the right moment to surface. The twins adored Danny with the uncomplicated affection of children who'd rarely experienced consistent male attention. He never talked down to them or dismissed their concerns, treating Emma's serious questions about book characters and Sophie's fascination with ranch animals with the same respect he showed adult conversations. When they brought him drawings or wanted to show him something they'd learned in school, he gave them his complete attention, making them feel valued and important. Rebecca often found herself watching these interactions from doorways or windows, her heart clenching at the sight of her daughters experiencing the kind of patient male guidance she'd dreamed of providing for them. Danny would have been a wonderful father, she realized, and the knowledge that her choices had denied him that possibility added another layer of regret to her complex feelings about their past. One evening in late February, after the twins were asleep and Ruth had retired to her sitting room with her mending, Rebecca found Danny in his study. He was working by lamplight, ledgers and correspondence spread across his desk, the kind of paperwork that came with managing a successful enterprise. She knocked softly on the doorframe, and he looked up with a smile that transformed his serious expression into something warm and welcoming. "Come in," he said, setting aside his pen. "I was just finishing up the monthly accounts. Spring planning starts soon, and there's always more details to consider than I expect." Rebecca settled into the leather chair across from his desk, tucking her skirts around her legs and studying the organized chaos of his workspace. Maps of the ranch property covered one wall, marked with notes about water sources and grazing rotations. Shelves held books on everything from animal husbandry to territorial law, evidence of the broad knowledge required to succeed in frontier business. "I wanted to thank you," she said, then paused to gather her thoughts. "Not just for taking this in, but for the way you've made this feel like home for Emma and Sophie. They've never had stability like this." Danny leaned back in his chair, his expression growing thoughtful. "They're good children, Rebecca. Smart and curious and fundamentally kind. Whatever mistakes you think you've made, you raised them right." The praise brought unexpected tears to her eyes. For years, she'd questioned every decision regarding her daughters, wondering if she was failing them by staying with Tommy, then wondering if she was failing them by running. To hear validation from someone she respected meant more than she could express. "I was so young when they were born," she said quietly. "Barely 20, married to a man I didn't really know, living in places where I had no friends or family. I made so many mistakes, Danny. So many times when I should have been stronger, should have protected them better." "You protected them the only way you knew how," Danny replied. And when that wasn't enough anymore, you found the courage to leave everything familiar and walk into a blizzard to save their lives. That's not the action of a weak woman or a bad mother. Rebecca met his eyes, seeing complete sincerity in his expression. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I'd made different choices. If I'd stayed in Cedar Falls, married you instead of running off with Tommy. The words hung in the quiet study, acknowledging the path not taken that had shaped both their lives. Danny was silent for a long moment, his fingers drumming softly on the desk surface. I used to wonder about that too, he admitted finally. Especially during those first few years after you left. I'd imagine the life we might have had, the children we might have raised together. But dwelling on what might have been is a dangerous habit, Rebecca. It can steal the joy from what actually is. Do you think we would have been happy? She asked, unable to keep the question inside any longer. Danny's smile was gentle, but tinged with sadness. I think we would have been very young and probably made our share of mistakes. But yes, I think we could have been happy. The question is whether we can be happy now, as the people we've become rather than the children we were. The honesty of his answer stirred something deep in Rebecca's chest, a longing she'd been trying to suppress since arriving at the ranch. The boy she'd known had grown into a man of remarkable depth and wisdom, someone who'd learned to find contentment in hard work and service to others. The attraction she'd felt for him in their youth had been based on his kindness and steady presence. But what she felt now was more complex, rooted in admiration for the choices he'd made and the life he'd built. I'm not the same person who left Cedar Falls, she said carefully. The years with Tommy changed me in ways I'm still understanding. I'm not sure I remember how to trust my own judgment about matters of the heart. You don't have to make any decisions about that now, Danny replied. Take the time you need to heal, to figure out who you are when you're not running from something. The ranch will be here, and so will I. His patience both comforted and frustrated her. Part of her wanted him to declare his feelings, to sweep her into his arms and promise that everything would work out perfectly. But the wiser part of her recognized that such dramatic gestures belonged to the realm of girlish fantasies, not the complex reality of two adults who'd been shaped by loss and disappointment. What if Tommy comes? She asked, voicing the fear that haunted her quiet moments. What if my being here brings violence to your people? Danny's expression hardened slightly, reminding her that beneath his gentle exterior lay the steel required to succeed on the frontier. Then we'll deal with Tommy Garrett when he arrives. This ranch has faced threats before, Rebecca. We have good men, good weapons, and the will to protect what's ours. The possessive note in his voice when he said ours sent warmth through her despite her fears. Whatever uncertainty existed about their personal future, Danny clearly considered her and her daughter as part of his extended family now, people worthy of his protection and care. Spring arrived early that year, bringing with it a burst of activity as the ranch prepared for the busy season ahead. Calving began in earnest, requiring round-the-clock attention from the ranch hands. New foals appeared in the pastures there, wobbly legs and curious natures delighting the children who watched from fence rails during their after-school hours. The kitchen garden was planted under Ruth's supervision, with Emma and Sophie assigned their own small plots where they could grow vegetables and flowers. Rebecca found herself increasingly involved in the ranch's daily operations, her organizational skills and attention to detail making her invaluable during the hectic spring months. She helped coordinate work schedules, manage supply orders, and served as liaison between the main house and the various ranch families when issues arose. The work was demanding but satisfying, giving her a sense of purpose that had been missing from her life for years. Danny began including her in business discussions, seeking her opinion on decisions ranging from equipment purchases to personnel matters. Rebecca discovered she had an intuitive grasp of the human dynamics that made the ranch function. an ability to see potential problems before they became serious conflicts. Her suggestions were always thoughtful and practical, earning her the respect of the senior ranch hands who might have initially viewed her as just another mouth to feed. The growing partnership between them felt natural and comfortable, built on mutual respect and shared goals rather than romantic fantasy. They worked well together, their different strengths complementing each other in ways that benefited the entire ranch community. Rebecca found herself looking forward to their evening planning sessions, when they would sit in Danny's study and discuss everything from crop rotation to educational needs for the ranch children. But alongside this professional collaboration, personal awareness continued to grow between them. Rebecca noticed the way Danny's hands moved when he explained something, the way his eyes lit up when discussing a successful project, the way he unconsciously adjusted his behavior to make her feel comfortable and valued. She caught him watching her sometimes when he thought she wasn't aware, his expression thoughtful and affectionate in ways that made her pulse quicken. For his part, Danny seemed to be falling in love all over again, not with the memory of the girl she'd been, but with the woman she'd become. He clearly admired her resilience and determination, the way she'd protected her children against impossible odds, the grace with which she'd integrated herself into ranch life. His respect for her judgment grew daily as her contributions to ranch operations proved consistently valuable. The tension between them was not uncomfortable, but it was undeniable. They were two adults powerfully drawn to each other, but constrained by complex circumstances and the weight of their shared history. Neither wanted to rush into something that might complicate the stability Rebecca and her daughters had found, but neither could completely ignore the emotional connection that seemed to strengthen with each passing day. One evening in early April, as Rebecca helped Danny review applications for seasonal workers, their professional discussion gradually shifted into more personal territory. They were alone in the study, the rest of the house quiet around them, and the intimacy of the setting made deeper conversation feel natural and inevitable. "Do you miss it?" Danny asked, setting aside a stack of letters. "The excitement of moving from place to place, seeing new country?" Rebecca considered the question seriously, thinking about the constant uncertainty that had marked her years with Tommy. "I thought I would," she said finally. "For so long. Staying in one place felt like giving up, like admitting defeat. But I'm learning there's a difference between being trapped somewhere and choosing to make a home somewhere." "And which is this?" She met his eyes across the desk, seeing genuine curiosity rather than the loaded expectation such a question might carry from another man. "This feels like choice," she said quietly, "like the first real choice I've made in years." Danny nodded, his expression pleased but not triumphant. "I'm glad. This place is better with you and the girls here. Not just because of the work you do, but because of the life you bring to it." "The twins love it here," Rebecca said, deflecting the personal compliment toward safer ground. "They've never had the chance to just be children before. Watching them discover that they can trust the world not to hurt them, it's better than any medicine Dr. Morgan could have prescribed." "They trust you," Danny observed. "Children that age don't develop that kind of confidence without a mother who's protected them, even when protection cost her everything." Rebecca felt tears gather in her eyes at the gentle praise. "I failed them so many times, Danny. Let them see things no child should see. Expose them to dangers that still give me nightmares. But you got them out," he said firmly. "When it mattered most, when their lives were at stake, you found the strength to save them. That's what they'll remember when they're grown, not the difficult times that came before." The conversation was interrupted by a soft knock at the study door, and Jake Morrison entered with an expression that immediately put both Danny and Rebecca on alert. The foreman's face was grim, and he carried himself with the tension of a man bearing bad news. "Sorry to interrupt," Jake said, his voice carefully controlled, "but we've got a situation developing that you need to know about." Danny was on his feet immediately, His relaxed posture replaced by the alert readiness Rebecca had learned to associate with potential trouble. What kind of situation? Ryder came in about an hour ago, young fellow from Cedar Falls. Says there's been a man asking questions around town, describing a woman and 2 little girls, offering money for information about where they might have gone. Rebecca felt her blood turn to ice water, the peaceful evening shattered by the reality she'd been dreading for weeks. Tommy had found their trail, and it was only a matter of time before he traced them to the ranch. What kind of questions? Danny asked, his voice steady despite the tension that had suddenly filled the room. The usual sort when a man's hunting someone, Jake replied. Asking about recent arrivals, women traveling alone with children, anyone who might have taken in strangers during the blizzard. He's been spreading money around pretty freely, which suggests he's serious about finding what he's looking for. Rebecca stood slowly, her legs unsteady as the implications hit her fully. He's here. Tommy's in Cedar Falls. Danny moved around the desk to stand beside her, his presence immediately comforting despite the fear that gripped her. How long do we have? He asked Jake. Hard to say. The boy who brought word said the stranger was drunk when he started asking questions this afternoon, but that doesn't mean he won't sober up and get more organized. Could be here tonight. Could be tomorrow. Could be he'll spend a few more days drinking and gambling before he makes his move. What do we do? Rebecca asked, though part of her already knew the answer. The safety and peace they built over. The past weeks was about to be tested by the violence of her past. Danny's jaw was set in determined lines as he considered their options. We prepare for the worst and hope for the best. Jake, I want every man armed and ready. Post guards on the access roads, but keep them hidden. If Garrett shows up, I want to know about it before he gets within rifle range of the house. All ready. Done, Jake replied with grim satisfaction. Soon as I heard the news, I sent riders to Billy Hendricks and Tom Walsh. They'll watch the north and south approaches respectively. Anyone coming toward the ranch tonight won't arrive unannounced. Rebecca felt a surge of gratitude for the efficiency with which Danny's people had responded to potential threat. These men had accepted her and her daughters as part of their community, and now they were prepared to risk their own safety to protect them from Tommy's violence. There's something else, Jake continued, his expression growing even more serious. The boy from town said the stranger was asking specific questions about you. Danny knew your name, knew about the ranch, seemed to know there was history between you and the woman he was seeking. Danny's eyes found Rebecca's, and she saw her own fear reflected in his expression. Tommy hadn't just tracked them to Cedar Falls. He'd done his research and understood exactly where they'd taken refuge. That meant he would come prepared for resistance, armed with knowledge about Danny's resources and the layout of the ranch. He always was good at gathering information, Rebecca said quietly. Tommy makes his living reading people and situations. If he knows about our past, Danny, then he knows you'll protect me. That makes you a threat he'll want to eliminate. The study fell silent as the 3 adults contemplated the reality of what they were facing. This wasn't just a matter of an angry husband demanding the return of his property. This was potentially a violent confrontation between dangerous men, with innocent lives hanging in the balance. Danny reached for Rebecca's hand, his grip warm and steady despite the tension that filled the room. Whatever happens, we face it together. You're not alone in this anymore, Rebecca. You and the girls are part of this family now, and we protect our family. The simple declaration stirred something powerful in Rebecca's chest, a sense of belonging and security she'd never truly experienced before. But it also filled her with terrible guilt at the thought that her presence might bring harm to people who'd shown her nothing but kindness. Maybe I should leave, she said, though the words felt like giving up hope itself. Take the girls and disappear again before Tommy has a chance to threaten anyone here. No, Danny's response was immediate and uncompromising. Running didn't solve the problem before, and it won't solve it now. Besides, where would you go in the middle of the night with 2 small children? Tommy would hunt you down within days, and next time you might not be lucky enough to survive the chase. Jake nodded agreement. Danny's right. Better to face this. Here, on our ground, with good men backing us up. Your husband might be dangerous, but he's just one man against a dozen ranch hands who know this terrain like the back of their hands. Rebecca wanted to argue, wanted to insist that she couldn't let innocent people risk their lives for her mistakes. But she also recognized the truth in what both men were saying. She'd reached the end of running, the point where flight was no longer possible or practical. Whatever happened with Tommy would happen here, at Mitchell Ranch, among people who'd chosen to stand with her despite the cost. What about Emma and Sophie? She asked, her maternal instincts overriding every other concern. If there's going to be violence, I need to know they'll be safe. Ruth's already moving them to the root cellar behind the main house, Jake replied. It's the most secure spot on the ranch, with thick walls and only one entrance that we can guard easily. Dr. Morgan is coming out from town to stay with them, so they'll have medical care if needed and a familiar face to keep them calm. The thoroughness of the preparations impressed and frightened Rebecca simultaneously. These people had dealt with dangerous situations before, she realized, and their calm efficiency suggested they knew exactly what they were doing. But it also drove home the reality that violence was coming to their peaceful community, and she was the reason for it. Danny squeezed her hand gently. Try to get some rest, he said, though his tone suggested he knew how unlikely that was. Whatever happens tomorrow, you'll need your strength. As Rebecca made her way upstairs to check on her sleeping daughters, she couldn't shake the feeling that the peaceful interlude of the past weeks had been nothing more than the calm before. A storm. Tommy Garrett was coming, and with him would come a reckoning for choices made long ago under a cottonwood tree in Cedar Falls. Dawn broke gray and cold over Mitchell Ranch, the sky heavy with clouds that promised more snow before evening. Rebecca had spent the night in the chair beside her daughter's bed, watching them sleep peacefully while her mind churned with fear and preparation. Emma and Sophie looked so small and vulnerable in the morning light, their faces smooth with the innocence of childhood that she was desperate to preserve. Ruth appeared in the doorway carrying a breakfast tray, her expression grim but determined. The older woman had risen before dawn to coordinate the ranch's defensive preparations, ensuring that families were safely positioned and supplies were distributed to the men who would stand guard throughout the day. Time to get them ready, Ruth said quietly, setting the tray on the bedside table. Dr. Morgan arrived an hour ago, and she's prepared the cellar with blankets, books, and enough food for several days if necessary. Rebecca nodded, gently shaking Emma and Sophie awake. The twins stirred sleepily, automatically reaching for their mother as consciousness returned. She helped them dress in warm clothes, explaining in calm tones that they were going to spend the day in a special safe place with Dr. Morgan while the adults took care of some ranch business. Is the bad man coming? Sophie asked with the directness that children possess when they sense adult tension. Rebecca's heart clenched at the question, but she managed to keep her voice steady. There might be some trouble today, sweetheart, but Danny and all the ranch hands are going to make sure we stay safe. You and Emma just need to be brave and do exactly what Dr. Morgan tells you. Emma studied her mother's face with the serious expression she'd worn far too often for a child her age. Will you come see us? As soon as I can, Rebecca promised, though she had no idea what the day would bring. Remember that no matter what happens, Danny and I love you both very much, and we're going to do everything possible to keep you safe. The walk to the root cellar felt like a funeral march despite Rebecca's attempts to keep the mood light for her daughter's sake. Dr. Morgan waited at the entrance, her medical bag supplemented by supplies for an extended stay underground. The cellar had been carved into a hillside behind the main house, its thick stone walls and single entrance making it virtually impregnable. Emma and Sophie clung to their mother as she prepared to leave them, their small arms tight around her waist with desperate strength. Rebecca knelt to their level, fighting back tears as she looked into their frightened faces. "I need you too. Take care of each other," she said softly. "Emma, you're the older sister, so help Sophie if she gets scared. Sophie, you help Emma too, because sometimes big sisters need their little sisters to be brave for them." "We'll be good, Mama," Emma whispered against her neck. "I know you will, darling. You're the best girls in the whole world, and I'm so proud of you both." Dr. Morgan helped ease the separation with gentle authority, drawing the twins' attention to the books and games she'd brought to keep them occupied. As Rebecca climbed back up the cellar steps, she could hear Sophie asking about a story and Emma's voice joining in with interest. The normalcy of their chatter was both comforting and heartbreaking. Danny waited for her outside the main house, dressed in work clothes, but with a gun belt around his waist that reminded her how serious their situation had become. His eyes searched her face for signs of breakdown, but found only grim determination. "They're safe," she said simply. "Now what do we do?" "Now we wait," Danny replied. "Jake's positioned men at all the approach points, and we've got rifles distributed to everyone who can shoot. If Garrett comes alone, we'll have overwhelming advantage. If he brings help, we'll still have the benefit of knowing the terrain and having prepared positions." They walked together toward the main barn, where Jake Morrison was distributing ammunition and final instructions to the ranch hands. Rebecca was struck by the calm professionalism of the men, their easy familiarity with weapons and tactical thinking. This wasn't their first experience with potential violence, she realized, though she hoped it wouldn't escalate to actual bloodshed. "Mrs. Hartford," Jake said, touching his hat brim respectfully. "Danny says you know this Garrett fellow pretty well. Anything you can tell us about how he's likely to approach this?" Rebecca considered the question carefully, thinking about Tommy's patterns and preferences during their years together. "He's not stupid, despite his drinking. Tommy prefers to have advantages before he commits to action. If he comes during daylight, it means he's confident about his position. If he waits until dark, he's planning something sneaky." "What about backup?" asked Bill Henderson, checking the action on his rifle. "Man like that usually travels with hired guns when he's serious about violence." Tommy's pride wouldn't let him admit he needed help dealing with one woman and a rancher, Rebecca said. But his practical side might override his ego if he thinks the odds are against him. He's probably spent the night in Cedar Falls, learning about Danny's resources and reputation. Danny nodded thoughtfully, which means he knows we have good men and plenty of firepower. A smart man would back down from those odds. But Tommy's not just smart, Rebecca warned. He's also mean when he's been crossed, and leaving him with the twins is the worst kind of crossing in his mind. His pride won't let him walk away from this, especially not if he's been drinking. The morning stretched endlessly as they waited for Tommy's arrival. Rebecca found herself pacing between the main house and the barn, unable to settle anywhere for long. Every sound made her jump. Every movement in her peripheral vision caused her heart to race. The ranch hands maintained their positions with admirable patience, but she could see the tension in their shoulders and the way their hands stayed close to their weapons. Danny remained a steady presence throughout the long hours, checking on his men and coordinating with Jake while keeping Rebecca informed of developments. His calm leadership was reassuring, but she could see the strain in the lines around his eyes and the careful way he moved, always ready to react to sudden danger. It was nearly noon when the first warning came from Tom Walsh, positioned on the south ridge overlooking the main road to Cedar Falls. A single rifle shot echoed across the valley, the prearranged signal that riders were approaching. Rebecca's breath caught in her throat as she realized the waiting was finally over. Jake appeared at Danny's elbow within minutes, his face grim with concentration. Tom counts 3 riders, moving slow and deliberate up the main road. Leading man matches. The description you gave us of Garrett. Rebecca felt her knees weaken at the confirmation that Tommy had indeed found them, but she forced herself to remain upright and focused. 3 riders means he found local help, probably men from the saloon who need money badly enough to risk their lives. Or men who don't understand what they're walking into, Danny said grimly. Either way, we stick to the plan. Let them get close enough to talk before we reveal our full strength. The next 20 minutes felt like hours as the approaching riders made their way up the winding road toward the ranch buildings. Rebecca positioned herself in the main house parlor, where she could see through the windows but remain concealed from direct view. Danny and Jake took positions on the front porch, their rifles held casually but ready for immediate use. When Tommy Garrett finally came into clear view, Rebecca felt a complex mixture of fear and anger wash over her. He looked older than she remembered, his face more lined and his body showing the effects of years of hard living. But his posture in the saddle was still arrogant and commanding, the stance of a man who expected to intimidate through reputation and violence. The 2 men riding with him were exactly what Rebecca had expected. Rough-looking characters with the shifty eyes and poor hygiene of saloon drifters. They carried weapons but held them awkwardly, suggesting they were more accustomed to bullying. Drunks than facing determined opponents in a real fight. Tommy reined in his horse about 50 yards from the main house, close enough for conversation but far enough to provide some protection if shooting started. His eyes swept the visible ranch buildings with calculating assessment, taking in the defensive positions and the quality of the men who held them. "Daniel Mitchell," Tommy called out, his voice carrying the false heartiness of a confidence man. "Heard you've got something that belongs to me." Danny stepped forward slightly, his rifle held in a relaxed position that nonetheless conveyed readiness. "Can't say that I do, Garrett. Everything on this ranch belongs to someone who has a right to it." Tommy's smile was cold and predatory, as he dismounted from his horse with deliberate slowness. "Now that's interesting, because I'm missing a wife and 2 children who disappeared from my home without permission. Imagine my surprise when I learned they'd taken shelter with an old friend." "Your wife left you," Danny replied evenly. "Can't say I blame her, considering the condition she was in when she arrived here. Woman doesn't stab herself and walk 5 miles through a blizzard unless she's running from something pretty terrible." Rebecca watched through the window as Tommy's expression darkened at the accusation. She'd seen that look before, the moment when his charm gave way to the violence that lurked beneath the surface. His hand moved instinctively toward his gun, but he controlled the impulse when he noticed the number of rifle barrels that had appeared in windows and doorways around the ranch compound. "Family disputes are private matters," Tommy said, his voice taking on a harder edge. "What happens between a man and his wife isn't anyone else's concern. It becomes my concern when that woman and her children arrive on my property bleeding and half frozen," Danny replied. "And it stays my concern as long as they're under my protection." Tommy's laugh was ugly and without humor. "Protection? From their own husband and father? That's a serious accusation, Mitchell. Almost sounds like you're calling me unfit to care for my own family." "I'm not calling you anything," Danny said calmly. "But I'm also not turning over a woman and 2 children to someone who put a knife in her ribs. If you want to discuss this further, you're welcome to do it through the territorial marshal." The suggestion of legal intervention clearly struck a nerve with Tommy, whose face flushed with anger at the implication that his authority over his family might be subject to outside scrutiny. Rebecca knew that Tommy had always viewed wives and children as property, subject to his will and discipline, without interference from law or society. "Those children are mine by blood and law," Tommy snarled, abandoning any pretense of civility. "No rancher with more money than sense is going to keep them from me. I've got rights, Mitchell, and I mean to exercise them." "You've got the right to leave my property peacefully," Danny replied, his own voice hardening slightly. "And I'd suggest you take advantage of that right while it's still available." The two hired men flanking Tommy shifted nervously in their saddles, clearly beginning to understand that they'd walked into a situation far more dangerous than they'd anticipated. Ranch hands had appeared from seemingly everywhere, all armed and all focused on the three unwelcome visitors with professional intensity. Tommy's eyes swept the defensive positions again, calculating odds and options with the practical mind that had kept him alive through years of dangerous living. Rebecca could almost see him weighing his pride against his survival instincts, trying to find a way to back down without losing face completely. "I'll make you a deal, Mitchell," Tommy said finally. "Give me back my wife and children, and I'll forget about the theft of my property and the insult to my name. Keep interfering in my family business, and I'll make sure everyone in the territory knows you're the kind of man who steals another man's family." Danny's response was immediate and uncompromising. "The only deal you're getting is safe passage off my land in the next 10 minutes. After that, you'll be treated as a trespasser and handled accordingly." The finality in Danny's voice seemed to penetrate even Tommy's alcohol-fogged thinking. He stood in the ranch yard for a long moment, his hand resting on his gun butt, while he stared at the house where he knew Rebecca was watching. When he spoke again, his voice carried a note of personal venom that made Rebecca's blood run cold. "This isn't over, Rebecca," he called toward the house. "You can hide behind other men's guns for now, but eventually you'll have to face what you've done. And when that day comes, there won't be enough distance in the world to keep you safe from the consequences." The threat hung in the air like smoke, poisoning the afternoon with its implications of future violence. But before Danny could respond, Tommy made a mistake that changed everything. Perhaps driven by frustration or wounded pride, he drew his pistol in a quick, threatening motion that triggered an immediate response from the hidden ranch hands. The first rifle shot came from the barn loft, followed immediately by two more from different directions. Tommy's hired guns, already nervous and outgunned, panicked at the sound of gunfire and spurred their horses toward the road in desperate flight. Tommy himself dove for cover behind his horse, his own weapon discharging harmlessly into the air as he fell. "Hold fire!" Danny shouted, preventing what could have become a massacre. "Let them run!" But Tommy Garrett was done running. Crouched behind his frightened horse, he raised his pistol toward the main house where he knew Rebecca was watching. The intent was clear, even if the target wasn't visible, and Danny's response was swift and decisive. The shot that ended Tommy Garrett's life came from Danny's rifle, fired with the accuracy of a man who'd learned to shoot for survival on the frontier. Tommy dropped without a sound, his weapon falling from nerveless fingers as he crumpled to the frozen ground of the ranch yard. The silence that followed was profound and terrible, broken only by the sound of galloping hooves as Tommy's companions disappeared down the road toward town. Rebecca found herself unable to move, staring through the window at the still form of the man who'd terrorized her family for years. Danny lowered his rifle slowly, his face grim with the knowledge of what he'd just done. Killing a man, even in defense of innocent lives, was never easy for someone with a conscience. But as he looked toward the house where Rebecca and her daughters had found safety, he knew he'd made the only choice possible. Jake Morrison approached the fallen body with professional caution, checking for signs of life before pronouncing Tommy Garrett officially dead. The ranch hands began to emerge from their positions, their faces reflecting the mixed relief and solemnity that followed violent confrontation. Rebecca finally found the strength to leave the house, walking on unsteady legs toward the man who'd killed her husband to protect her family. Danny met her halfway across the yard, his rifle set aside and his arms opening to receive her as she collapsed against his chest in a mixture of grief, relief, and overwhelming gratitude. "It's over," he said quietly, his voice rough with emotion. "He can't hurt you anymore. Rebecca wept against his shoulder, not for Tommy but for all the years of fear and pain that had finally come to an end. She wept for her daughter's lost innocence and for the violence that had been necessary to secure their freedom. Most of all, she wept for the realization that she was truly safe for the first time, since she'd left Cedar Falls as a naive young woman. The aftermath of Tommy's death required careful handling to avoid legal complications. Jake Morrison rode to town immediately to fetch the territorial marshal, while Danny and his men prepared a detailed account of the confrontation that had led to the shooting. Dr. Morgan emerged from the root cellar to examine the body and provide official medical testimony about the circumstances of death. Marshal William Bryant arrived that evening with a small posse, prepared to investigate what could have been a case of murder. But the evidence was overwhelming and the witness testimony consistent. Tommy Garrett had drawn a weapon with intent to harm innocent people on private property, and Danny Mitchell had acted in lawful defense of his family and home. The two hired guns were captured before they could leave the territory, their panicked flight and incoherent stories providing additional evidence of Tommy's aggressive intentions. Under questioning, they admitted to being hired for intimidation and violence, though they claimed ignorance of the specific details of Tommy's grievances. By the time the marshal completed his investigation 3 days later, the official verdict was clear: justifiable homicide in defense of others. Danny would face no charges, and Rebecca was free to make her own choices about her future, without legal interference from Tommy's remaining associates or family. Emma and Sophie emerged from their underground refuge, changed by the experience but not broken. The knowledge that the frightening man from their past was gone forever brought a visible lightness to their steps and voices. They asked few questions about what had happened, seeming to understand instinctively that adult matters had been resolved in adult ways. The weeks that followed brought a different kind of healing to Mitchell Ranch. The violent confrontation with Tommy had cleared the air in ways that words never could have, removing the shadow of threat that had hung over Rebecca's new life. She was free now, not just from Tommy's immediate danger, but from the fear of his eventual arrival that had colored every peaceful moment. Danny handled the killing of Tommy Garrett with the same quiet strength he brought to all difficult situations. He'd taken a life to protect innocent people, and while he found no joy in the act, he felt no guilt about its necessity. The safety of his family, as he now considered Rebecca and her daughters, was worth any personal cost. Spring arrived in full flower that year, bringing with it a sense of renewal and possibility that seemed to embrace the entire ranch community. The cattle were healthy and numerous, the crops showed promise of an abundant harvest, and the families under Danny's protection were thriving in ways that went beyond mere survival. Rebecca found herself settling into ranch life with a completeness she'd never experienced before. Her work as assistant teacher and household manager gave her purpose and recognition, while her growing relationship with Danny provided the emotional foundation she'd been seeking since childhood. The love between them was different now than it had been in their youth, tempered by experience and strengthened by mutual respect. On a warm evening in late June, Danny asked Rebecca to walk with him to the old cottonwood tree that stood behind the main ranch buildings. It was a massive specimen that had weathered decades of prairie storms and seasonal changes, its broad canopy providing shelter for countless generations of ranch families. They stood beneath its spreading branches as the sun set behind the distant mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. Danny reached into his pocket and withdrew a small leather box, his hand steady despite the magnitude of what he was about to ask. 15 years ago, I carved our initials in this tree, he said quietly. I thought then that promises were simple things, that love was just a matter of wanting someone enough. I've learned since then that real love is about choosing someone every day, through good times and bad, through fear and joy, and everything in between. Rebecca's heart began to race as she realized what was happening, but she remained silent, letting Danny find his own words for what he needed to say. "I'm not asking you to go back to being the girl you were," he continued, opening the box to reveal a simple gold band set with a small but perfect diamond. "I'm asking you to marry the man I've become, to choose the life we can build together. From this moment forward." The ring wasn't elaborate or expensive, but it represented something far more valuable than material wealth. It represented commitment, choice, partnership, and permanence. All the things Rebecca had dreamed of as a young woman, but never truly understood. "What about Emma and Sophie?" she asked, though she already knew the answer. "They're my daughters now, if they'll have me," Danny replied. "Not because I'm replacing their father, but because I choose to love them and provide for them as my own. They deserve a father who'll be there every day, who'll teach them that they're worthy of respect and protection." Rebecca looked at the ring, then at the man who'd waited 15 years for her to find her way home. Danny had become everything she'd hoped for and more, a partner worthy of trust and devotion. The boy who'd carved their initials in bark had grown into a man who could carve a future from the wilderness. "Yes," she said simply, extending her hand for him to place the ring on her finger. "Not because I need rescuing, but because I choose to build something beautiful with you." The ring fit perfectly, as if it had been waiting all these years for her finger. They kissed beneath the cottonwood tree as the stars began to appear overhead, sealing a promise that was both new and ancient, both practical and romantic. Their wedding took place 2 months later, a simple ceremony conducted by the traveling minister who served the scattered ranching communities throughout the territory. The entire ranch community gathered to witness the union, along with friends from Cedar Falls and neighboring spreads who'd come to know and respect both Danny and Rebecca. Emma and Sophie served as flower girls, their faces glowing with happiness, as they watched their mother marry the man who'd already proven his love for them through daily acts of kindness and protection. They wore new dresses sewn by Mrs. Henderson and carried bouquets of wildflowers picked from the ranch meadows. The ceremony itself was brief but meaningful, focused on the vows Danny and Rebecca wrote for each other rather than elaborate ritual. They promised to support each other's dreams, to face challenges together, and to create a home where children could grow up safe and loved. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, the cheers from their friends echoed across the valley like a celebration of hope itself. The years that followed brought the kind of happiness that comes from building something together rather than simply finding it ready-made. Danny and Rebecca expanded the ranch operations while maintaining the close-knit community that made it more than just a business. Emma and Sophie grew into confident young women who understood their own worth and expected to be treated with respect. The story of the woman bleeding in the snow and the hoofbeats that saved her became part of ranch legend, told around winter fires to new arrivals who needed to understand that second chances were possible even after the darkest moments. It was a story of redemption and love, of courage and commitment, of the truth that sometimes the best things in life are worth waiting for. Rebecca never forgot the night that Danny rode into the storm to save her and her daughters, but she also never forgot that real salvation had come not from rescue, but from the choice to build a new life based on honesty and mutual respect. She'd learned that true love wasn't about finding someone to complete you, but about choosing to become the best version of yourself alongside someone who was doing the same. The cottonwood tree still stood behind the ranch house, its trunk bearing the carved initials of 2 teenagers who'd dreamed of forever. But now it also sheltered the swing that Danny had built for Emma and Sophie, and the garden where Rebecca grew vegetables and flowers, and the countless family gatherings that had made it the heart of a home built on love, patience, and the conviction that every ending can become a new beginning. 10 years had transformed the Mitchell Ranch from a successful cattle operation into something approaching a small town. What had once been a collection of ranch buildings scattered across the Wyoming landscape now resembled a thriving community. complete with its own general store, expanded schoolhouse, and a small church that served families from neighboring spreads as well as ranch residents. Rebecca stood on the front porch of the main house, watching the morning bustle with the satisfied eye of someone who'd helped build everything she surveyed. At 37, she'd grown into the kind of woman who commanded respect through quiet competence rather than dramatic gestures. Her copper hair, now streaked with premature silver that Danny claimed made her more beautiful than ever, was pinned back in a practical style that allowed her to move easily between her various responsibilities. Emma and Sophie, now 15 and 14 respectively, had grown into remarkable young women who bore little resemblance to the frightened children who'd arrived during that terrible blizzard a decade earlier. Emma had inherited her mother's serious nature and love of learning, serving as assistant teacher in the ranch school while preparing for the teaching college in Denver that she planned to attend the following year. Sophie had developed into a gifted artist whose sketches and paintings decorated homes throughout the territory, her natural talent nurtured by correspondence courses and visiting instructors that Danny had arranged. Neither girl remembered much about Tommy Garrett beyond vague impressions of fear and uncertainty. They'd grown up calling Danny Papa with the unconscious ease of children who'd never doubted their place in his affections. He'd adopted them legally 3 years after his marriage to Rebecca, a formality that changed nothing in their daily lives but meant everything for their security and sense of belonging. The ranch now employed over 60 people in various capacities, from traditional cowboys and farmers to the craftsmen and shopkeepers who served the growing community. Danny had proven as skilled at managing growth as he'd been at building the original operation, carefully selecting new residents based on character and work ethic rather than simply economic need. Jake Morrison remained as foreman, though his responsibilities had expanded to include oversight of the community's civil functions. At 52, he'd married the widow Sarah Chun, a Chinese-American woman who'd arrived 3 years earlier seeking refuge from anti-immigrant violence in California mining towns. Their partnership had become another of the ranch's success stories, proof that second chances and new beginnings were possible at any age. Dr. Morgan had been persuaded to establish a permanent clinic on ranch property, serving not only the immediate community, but traveling to provide medical care throughout the surrounding territory. Her presence had attracted other professional women, seeking alternatives to the limited opportunities available in traditional frontier towns, creating an unusually progressive atmosphere that drew families from hundreds of miles away. The ranch school had grown from a single-room building serving a handful of children to a proper educational institution with multiple teachers and students ranging from elementary through secondary levels. Rebecca served as principal and head teacher, applying the organizational skills she'd developed through years of ranch management to create an educational program that rivaled anything available in territorial capitals. The success of the school had become one of Rebecca's greatest sources of pride. Many of their graduates went on to colleges and universities throughout the country, carrying with them not just academic knowledge but the values of hard work, community service, and respect for others that characterized ranch life. Several had returned after completing their educations, bringing new skills and perspectives that enriched the community even further. Danny emerged from the barn leading his favorite horse, Thunder's successor, a magnificent black gelding named Storm, who possessed his predecessor's steady temperament and sure footing in difficult terrain. At 42, Danny had aged well, his face lined by years of outdoor work, but his body still strong and capable. He'd grown into his role as community leader with the same quiet competence he'd shown as a ranch manager, earning respect throughout the territory as someone whose word could be trusted absolutely. The territorial government had approached him repeatedly about running for various elected offices, but Danny consistently declined such opportunities. His interests lay in building rather than governing, in creating opportunities for individuals. and families rather than managing large-scale political entities. The ranch and its community provided all the challenge and satisfaction he needed. Morning meetings in an hour, Rebecca called as Danny approached the house. The Hendersons want to discuss expanding the blacksmith operation, and we've got 3 new family applications to review. Danny nodded, settling into the chair beside her on the porch. This had become their daily ritual. A few minutes of quiet conversation before the demands of community leadership claimed their attention. It was a small thing, but these moments of connection had become the foundation of their marriage, brief interludes of intimacy that sustained them through busy days and complex decisions. "What's your sense of the new applications?" Danny asked, accepting the cup of coffee Rebecca poured from the pot she'd brought outside. "The Williamson family looks promising," Rebecca replied, consulting the papers in her lap. "He's got experience with sheep ranching that could complement our cattle operation, and she's trained as a nurse, which would help Dr. Morgan. Their children are well-behaved and eager to learn." "And the others?" Rebecca's expression grew, more thoughtful. "The Kowalski family has the skills we need for the proposed sawmill, but there's something in their references that concerns me. Nothing specific, just a sense that they might be running from something rather than running towards something." Danny understood the distinction immediately. Over the years, they'd learned to differentiate between people seeking genuine fresh starts and those simply trying to escape consequences of their actions. The former became valuable community members, while the latter often brought their problems with them despite good intentions. And the third application? Single woman. Maria Gonzalez, seeking work as a seamstress and general store clerk. Her references are excellent, and her letter demonstrates both intelligence and determination. "I'm inclined to accept her application, but I wanted your thoughts." The ranch had always welcomed single women seeking employment and independence, a policy that set them apart from many frontier communities where unmarried females were viewed with suspicion. Rebecca had insisted on this approach, remembering her own desperate need for sanctuary and opportunity, and the results had consistently validated her judgment. "Trust your instincts," Danny said, as he had countless times over the years. "You've never been wrong about character assessment." Their conversation was interrupted by the approach of a rider from the direction of Cedar Falls, dust rising from his horse's hooves as he covered the final mile to the ranch at a steady gallop. Rebecca shaded her eyes against the morning sun, recognizing the young man as Billy Patterson, son of the telegraph operator who served as their primary connection to news from the outside world. Billy reined in his horse near the porch, his face flushed with excitement and exertion. "Mr. Mitchell, Mrs. Mitchell, I've got news from back east that you'll want to hear. Major news about statehood." Danny and Rebecca exchanged glances, understanding immediately that Wyoming Territory's long-awaited admission to the Union was finally moving forward. They'd been following the political developments for months, knowing that statehood would bring significant changes to their community and way of life. "What kind of news?" Danny asked, rising from his chair. "Telegram came in this morning from the territorial capital," Billy replied, fumbling in his saddlebag for the message. "Says here that President Harrison is expected to sign the statehood bill within the month. Wyoming's going to be the 44th state, and we're going to be the first state to guarantee women the right to vote." The news was momentous, representing the culmination of decades of territorial development and political maneuvering. But for Rebecca, the significance went beyond simple political change. Wyoming's commitment to women's suffrage represented recognition of principles she'd fought for throughout her adult life, the belief that women deserved equal participation in the decisions that shaped their communities. "There's more," Billy continued, consulting the telegram again. "Territorial governor wants to appoint a commission to plan the transition to statehood, and your name's been mentioned as a possible member. Mr. Mitchell says here they need people with experience in community development and territorial administration." Danny's expression grew thoughtful as he considered the implications. Serving on such a commission would require extensive travel and time away from the ranch, but it would also provide opportunity to influence how the new state government developed its policies and institutions. What do you think? He asked Rebecca, knowing that her opinion would be decisive in his response. Rebecca considered the question carefully, weighing the potential benefits against the costs to their family and community. I think Wyoming needs people who understand that government should serve communities rather than control them, she said finally. And I think you have insights about building inclusive societies that could benefit the entire state. The decision to accept the appointment, when it came officially 2 weeks later, marked the beginning of a new chapter in their lives. Danny would spend part of each month in the territorial capital, working with other commissioners to develop frameworks for state government, while Rebecca assumed greater responsibility for day-to-day ranch operations. The arrangement worked better than either had expected, largely because their partnership had always been based on complementary strengths rather than rigid role divisions. Rebecca's administrative skills and community relationships made her a natural leader in Danny's absence, while his policy work at the state level often incorporated insights and approaches they'd developed through years of ranch community management. Emma's departure for teaching college in Denver that fall created another significant transition for the family. The young woman who boarded the eastbound train bore little resemblance to the frightened child who'd arrived at the ranch clutching her mother's skirts. She carried herself with quiet confidence, secure in her abilities and clear about her goals for the future. "I'll be back," Emma promised as she hugged her parents goodbye on the station platform. "This place is home, and I want to contribute to what we're building here. But I need to learn more about the wider world before I can be truly useful." Sophie, now the only child remaining at home, threw herself into her artistic pursuits with renewed energy. Her paintings of ranch life had begun attracting attention from galleries in Denver and San Francisco, and she'd received several commissions for portraits from wealthy families throughout the territory. At 14, she displayed a maturity and focus that impressed visiting artists and teachers. The winter of Wyoming's statehood year proved to be one of the mildest in recent memory, allowing construction projects to continue through months that usually forced suspension of outdoor work. The new church was completed in time for Christmas services, its simple but elegant design reflecting the practical spirituality that characterized ranch community life. Rebecca found herself thinking often about the journey that had brought her to this place, from the desperate flight through a blizzard to the comfortable security of her current life. The woman who'd collapsed bleeding in the snow seemed like someone from another lifetime, though Rebecca carried the lessons of that experience with her daily. The scars from Tommy's knife had faded to barely visible lines, but the emotional scars had transformed into sources of strength rather than weakness. Her understanding of vulnerability and fear made her more effective in helping other women who arrived at the ranch seeking fresh starts. Her experience with violence and its aftermath gave her insights that proved valuable in mediating conflicts and preventing escalation of disputes. Most importantly, her journey from desperation to security had taught her the difference between being saved and saving oneself. Danny's rescue that night in the blizzard had provided the opportunity for safety, but the real salvation had come through her own choices and efforts in the years that followed. The ranch's reputation as a place where people could rebuild their lives had spread throughout the Western Territories, attracting families and individuals from as far away as California and Texas. They came seeking opportunity, safety, community, and the chance to prove themselves through honest work and genuine contribution. Each new arrival brought their own stories of loss and hope, failed dreams, and determined perseverance. Rebecca had heard hundreds of such stories over the years, and while the details varied, the underlying themes remained constant. People needed more than just economic opportunity. They needed community, respect, and the chance to contribute something meaningful to the world around them. The ranch provided all these things, but it also demanded them in return. New residents were expected to work hard, treat others with respect, contribute to community welfare, and maintain the standards that had made the place successful. Those who embraced these expectations thrived, while those who resisted them usually moved on to seek easier situations elsewhere. Spring brought news that Emma had been accepted to an advanced teacher training program that would extend her education by an additional year. The letter announcing this opportunity arrived along with one of her regular reports about college life, filled with enthusiasm for new ideas and approaches to education that she wanted to bring back to the ranch school. "She's found her calling," Rebecca observed as she shared Emma's letter with Danny over breakfast. "Teaching isn't just what she wants to do, it's who she is. We're going to have an extraordinary educator on our hands when she comes home." Danny nodded with paternal pride, though Rebecca could see the concern in his expression. "Do you think she'll really come back?" Young people who get exposed to city life and intellectual opportunities sometimes find rural living too limiting. "Emma will come back," Rebecca said with certainty. "She understands that this place needs what she's learning, and she has the same commitment to community building that drives both of us. Besides, she knows she can create just as much intellectual excitement here as anywhere else if she's willing to work for it." The conversation was interrupted by Sophie's arrival at the breakfast table, her hands already stained with paint from early morning work in the converted barn studio that Danny had built for her artistic pursuits. At 15, she'd grown into a young woman of striking beauty, with her mother's copper hair and green eyes combined with Danny's steady temperament and practical intelligence. "Mrs. Chun wants to know if we can accommodate another family in the Chinese Quarter," Sophie announced, pouring herself coffee with the casual competence of someone raised without artificial restrictions on her capabilities. "Her cousin's family is coming from San Francisco, and they need somewhere safe to live while the husband looks for work." The ranch's Chinese community had grown steadily over the years, comprised primarily of families seeking refuge from the violence and discrimination that plagued their lives in mining towns and railroad communities. They'd established their own section of the ranch settlement, complete with traditional architecture and cultural practices, while integrating fully into the broader community's economic and social life. "What kind of work experience does the husband have?" Rebecca asked, already considering possibilities for employment and housing. "Carpentry and general construction," Sophie replied. "Mrs. Chun says he's skilled enough to work on the new schoolhouse addition if we decide to move forward with that project." The proposed schoolhouse expansion had been under discussion for months, part of the community's ongoing effort to accommodate growth while maintaining educational quality. Additional classroom space would allow them to serve more families and offer more advanced courses, potentially eliminating the need for promising students to leave the ranch for secondary education. Danny nodded thoughtfully. "Tell Mrs. Chun we'll find space for the family. Good construction workers are always needed, and we can probably accelerate the schoolhouse project if we have qualified craftsmen available." These kinds of decisions had become routine over the years, part of the continuous process of community development that characterized life at the ranch. But Rebecca never lost appreciation for the significance of such choices. The way each decision to welcome new residents or undertake new projects contributed to the creation of something larger and more meaningful than individual success. Summer brought a steady stream of visitors, some seeking permanent residence and others simply curious about the ranch's reputation as an unusual social experiment. Territorial officials, educators, and journalists came to observe and report on what one newspaper called a glimpse into the democratic future of the American West. Rebecca found herself serving as unofficial spokesperson for the community, explaining their approaches to governance, education, and social organization to audiences that ranged from sympathetic to skeptical. She developed considerable skill at articulating the principles that guided their community development, though she always emphasized that their success came from practical application rather than theoretical idealism. "We don't think of ourselves as utopian," she would tell visitors. "We're just a group of people who believe that everyone deserves the chance to build a decent life through honest work and mutual support. The specific methods we use are less important than the underlying commitment to treating each person with dignity and respect." The ranch's economic success made these social innovations more palatable to skeptics who might otherwise dismiss them as impractical idealism. The cattle operation continued to thrive. The agricultural ventures produced consistent profits, and the various service businesses served markets throughout the territory. Success, Rebecca had learned, provided the foundation for experimentation and change in ways that failure never could. Autumn brought news that would reshape their understanding of their own success. A delegation from the new state university in Laramie arrived to discuss the possibility of establishing a branch campus at the ranch, taking advantage of their educational facilities and community structure to create an innovative rural college program. The proposal was ambitious and complex, requiring significant investment in facilities and faculty while promising to transform the ranch into a genuine educational center serving the entire region. Danny and Rebecca spent weeks in discussions with university officials, community members, and potential investors, trying to determine whether such an expansion aligned with their long-term vision. "It would change everything," Rebecca observed during one of their evening planning sessions. "We'd go from being a large ranch community to being a small college town. The opportunities would be tremendous, but so would the challenges." Danny nodded, studying architectural drawings that showed proposed dormitories, classroom buildings, and research facilities scattered across ranch property. "The question is whether we can manage that kind of growth while maintaining the character and values that made us successful in the first place." The decision, when it came, reflected their characteristic approach to complex problems. They would proceed with a small pilot program, accepting 25 students for a one-year rural studies program that would combine traditional academic coursework with practical experience in community development and agricultural innovation. If the experiment succeeded, expansion could follow gradually and carefully. Winter brought Emma home for an extended visit, her first return since departing for college 2 years earlier. The young woman who stepped off the train at Cedar Falls had grown in confidence and intellectual sophistication, but she clearly remained rooted in the values and commitments that had shaped her upbringing. "This place looks more like a real town every time I see it," Emma observed as they rode toward the ranch in Danny's improved wagon. "But it still feels like home in all the ways that matter." The month Emma spent at the ranch over the winter holidays provided an opportunity for extended family conversations about the future, both her own and the community's. She shared insights from her college experiences while reacquainting herself with the rhythms and relationships of ranch life. "I want to come back permanently after graduation," Emma announced during Christmas dinner, addressing the extended family gathering that had become their holiday tradition. "But I want to come back as someone who can contribute new ideas and approaches, not just as someone returning to familiar routines." Sophie, now 16, increasingly confident about her own artistic abilities, had different but equally ambitious plans. "I want to study in Europe for a few years," she said, her statement surprising no one who'd watched her talent develop. "But like Emma, I want to bring what I learned back here. I think we could establish an art school that would serve students from all over the West." Rebecca listened to her daughter's plans with a mixture of pride and amazement. These young women had grown up to embody the best possibilities of the community, and she had helped create, combining individual ambition with commitment to collective welfare. They understood that personal success meant little without the opportunity to contribute to something larger than themselves. The conversation around the dinner table that Christmas evening included voices from throughout the ranch community, a dozen families who'd become genuine extended family over the years, Children who'd arrived as refugees or orphans had grown into productive adults with families of their own. Single women who'd sought employment and independence had become community leaders and successful entrepreneurs. Men who'd drifted west seeking second chances had found purpose and prosperity through honest work and mutual support. As Rebecca looked around the table at faces illuminated by lamplight and warmed by shared affection, she reflected on the journey that had brought them all to this moment. The path from that desperate night in the blizzard to the celebration of community and family had been neither straight nor simple, but every challenge and setback had contributed to the creation of something genuinely valuable. The ranch had become more than a business or even a community. It had become a demonstration of possibilities, proof that people could create lives of meaning and dignity through cooperation and mutual respect. The success they'd achieved wasn't measured only in economic terms, though those were certainly important, but in the quality of relationships they'd built and the opportunities they'd created for human flourishing. Later that evening, after the guests had departed and the house had grown quiet, Rebecca and Danny sat together in their bedroom, reviewing the events of the day and planning for the year ahead. These private conversations had become the cornerstone of their marriage, moments of intimacy and partnership that sustained them through the demands of community leadership. "Do you ever regret it?" Rebecca asked, a question she posed occasionally, though she already knew the answer. Taking us in that night, getting involved in all the complications that followed. Danny's answer was immediate and certain. Never. Not for a single moment. That night was the beginning of everything that matters most in my life. Rebecca nodded, settling against his shoulder with the comfortable familiarity of a couple who'd learned to find home in each other's presence. "Sometimes I think about the woman I was that night, bleeding in the snow with 2 frightened children. And I can barely recognize her. She seems like someone from another lifetime." "She was brave," Danny said quietly. "Desperate, but brave. She made the choice to save her children, even when it seemed impossible. Everything good that came after started with that choice." Outside their window, snow began to fall again, gentle flakes that would blanket the ranch in pristine white by morning. But unlike that terrible night a decade earlier, this snow brought no threat of danger or death. It was simply weather, a natural cycle that would pass in its time, leaving behind a world refreshed and renewed. The woman who watched the snow fall was no longer running from anything or anyone. She'd found her place, her purpose, and her people through a combination of chance, choice, and the kind of love that grows stronger through shared challenges and mutual support. The hoofbeats that had saved her life in the storm had carried her not just to safety, but to the discovery of who she was meant to become. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and opportunities, new families seeking fresh starts, and new projects requiring careful planning and execution. The ranch would continue to grow and change, adapting to circumstances while maintaining the values that made it special. Emma would return from college to contribute her educational expertise. Sophie would pursue her artistic dreams before bringing new cultural richness to the community. And Danny would continue building bridges between their local success and the larger world beyond. But tonight, surrounded by the peace of home and the warmth of lasting love, Rebecca Hartford Mitchell was exactly where she belonged. The girl who dreamed of escape and adventure had discovered that the greatest adventures were often found in the decision to stay, to build, and to believe that ordinary people could create extraordinary things when they chose to work together toward common dreams. The snow continued to fall, gentle and persistent, covering the ranch in a blanket of winter quiet. But unlike that desperate night years ago, the snow brought only the promise of spring to come, and all the possibilities that each new season would bring to a community built on hope, hard work, and the unshakable conviction that everyone deserved the chance to write a better ending to their story. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.